I might even finish the protagonist topic today. What I want to talk about in this video is again something that I would like to avoid, at least in large doses, and that's putting the protagonist on a timer of sorts, be it a disease that will claim him or his loved one, or an enemy who will definitely bring in an indestructible, unconquerable foe in a set amount of time, or maybe even a huge debt, unfairly imposed yet inescapable. With that comes usually the offer that cannot be refused, and when this sort of a time limit permeates the whole story, pushes the protagonist constantly, it feels to me slightly artificial, like the stakes are there just for the sake of the plot, and they rob the protagonist of initiative, at least partially. I don't mind something similar happening on a smaller scale and isolated event, but as a sole motivation for the story to happen, I don't feel like using that anytime soon in my own attempts at crafting a narrative that I would actually enjoy myself. Next bit I wanted to bring up is that I want to make sure that my protagonist's flaws and faults play at least some role in the story in some way or another. Otherwise, I would feel that their existence would be just symbolic, a token that lacks substance. They should be as positives displayed through action, although to a lesser extent than the positive ones. I mentioned that earlier, rather than being listed by a character or even by themselves, I am more comfortable with the protagonist admitting to knowing and being aware of his own flaws, saying them out loud, than the protagonist or other characters saying how attractive, smart, competent, experienced he is, which is something that I will absolutely avoid. To the very best of my meager abilities, it can be hinted at through jests, banter, or put on display through actions. Maybe an opponent admitting to those qualities existing within the protagonist once they clash. I am more lenient with the negative ones, but I need to make sure that they really appear within the story, that a negative personality trait, a distinguishable difference, and doesn't exist just to balance out the hidden positive traits, which is definitely something that I'll have to put considerable amount of effort into, making sure that I'm not just ticking boxes. Another thing I wanted to mention was that I would like my protagonist to constantly question statements that determine the possibility or impossibility of certain scenarios, in a way asking if I haven't said that it's impossible for me, why would you, the other character, know, and why should I listen? That's the protagonist speaking, and then might come the inevitable consequences of being inexperienced or arrogant, but also the possibility of creating something new, embarking on a different path within the world, within the setting, but obviously the probability of getting a bloody nose instead should be higher. Yet I feel that nothing should be set in stone and things shouldn't be done as everyone else did them throughout the history of the setting of the world, basically letting the protagonist explore. Then the last for now is something that I find very important in my area of storytelling, which is the competence, self sustainability, self reliance also comes from the protagonist asking questions, the answers to which he cannot possibly figure out by himself, and also from side characters that give answers that the protagonist would not have been able to figure out by himself, which means the protagonist should use his or her own brain first, then ask questions that are simply outside of his or her own expertise, but then the answer needs to be something that would end up justifying the question. The answer needs to show competence if the character that gave it has some. If the protagonist asks some professional, the professional needs to provide an answer that displays said professionalism. It should be the protagonist seeking help when the character actually needs it, not for the sake of an imaginary audience to allow for exposition through dialogue, asking primitive questions that the protagonist has no need to get answers for just because the reader might not know the answer and me, the writer, is incapable of presenting the facts through some other way. I said it that I prefer dialogue over exposition, monologue, narrative. So these bits of information pervade through dialogue, just not through the protagonist asking the equivalent of 1 plus 1 question and the equivalent of a university professor answering without skipping a beat. I understand that the reader needs to be informed, but also the protagonist already knows. So I have to be able to strike balance, as always, tread a fine line, explaining everything to the reader without making the protagonist seem incompetent and clueless. Well, for now, protagonists are over. I will absolutely come up with some more rambling that I will do my best to make comprehensible for myself about this particular topic, but next time I'll delve into side characters and maybe some personality traits in general within my stories. But for now, quick rapid arrows outro, and that would be it for today. So, rapid arrows, Fatty finally made it into the Rapid Arrows club room and is ready to share their findings with the legendary club. So the big message Fatty has turns out to be that the Brotherhood wants to follow the Rapid Arrows somewhere and find out some secret they might have. Well, Mirek still thanks the boy for his bravery, even though the club is not exactly afraid of the Brotherhood. And when Fatty asks if he could become a member of the Rapid Arrows, he is declined, but they do invite him for their Saturday venture. By the time they finish their conversation, it's already night, and Fatty has no idea how to get home from where they are now, especially in the dark. So he gets an escort by the Rapid Arrows, and he asks how are they going to meet up. They just tell him to wait by the limestone quarry next to the white rocks. They take shortcuts, climbing over walls, both to save some time and also make sure that Fatty doesn't know the way back to them. Then they are finally by the stairs that Fatty recognizes, and after a bit more wandering, he finally meets with Whistler, who tells him that he was able to escape from Bohosh and asks Fatty what happened to him. Well, the boy answers that he met the rapid arrows, which sends Whistler into frenzy, asking where and what happened exactly. But Fatty is not happy with what Whistler did, since he knew that running away from the Brotherhood's base would mean betraying Fatty and putting him in danger, and refuses to answer anything, which angers Whistler, and he promises that he'll find out everything in the end. Well, there is one last thing that Fatty has to deal with for tonight, and that's the wrath that will undoubtedly fall on his head from his parents and family. And that happens from his father. He gets called a failure and a tramp and receives beating from his mother, a more cruel punishment for this young boy. Instead of a proper dinner, he gets called a rascal and gets only bread soup instead, and receives more verbal beating by his little brother with his lisp, and even by the family dog barking at him indignantly. But then, when he is sitting on his knees in his room in penance, he has the face of an ascendant, saying that no matter the screaming, no matter the calling names, no matter the beatings, and even the bread soup, he is still the happiest young boy out there because he got to meet the rapid arrows. And that's it finally for this video. Extremely long intro, but I finished with the protagonists, and I'm going to go over some things that I have to say about side characters in general. They are still very much connected to the protagonist, so there will be overlap there, and I'm going to continue with the rapid arrows, their adventures, and Patty and his meeting with them is going to conclude at some point. So that's for the next video.